This is the Revoltage podcast. Today I'm talking with Kyle Thompson, who is one of my very good friends and also a fight fan as well. So let's chat about Conor McGregor.
Let's do it, McGregor. Give me your belt.
What was your overall thoughts of the fight, first off?
I mean, I think it was way better than anything I think you could have possibly have imagined, right? I mean, it's just kind of going into the fight, being a big McGregor fan, not really being into boxing, this was Mayweather's world, and you just could not have expected for the fight to go this way. Like, I legitimately told people my prediction pre-fight was 12-round unanimous decision, clean sweep for Mayweather. Win all 12 rounds, just obliterate on the scorecards. And that's not the fight that it was. Like, it was the most exciting Mayweather fight anybody has seen, maybe since the 90s, and that's not really exaggerating, I don't think. But I mean, in a lot of ways, and I know we'll probably get into it more later. I mean, it was a win for so many different people, for Conor, for Floyd, for even for Canelo and Triple G. It's a win because people are talking about boxing when there is really no reason to be talking about boxing.
Yeah, totally. I completely 100% agree because I thought this was just going to be a snooze fest.
Yeah.
I thought Mayweather was going to run like he does in most of his fights. But really, I mean, I got to give him props. One, he won. But
right.
Two, he took it to him. He didn't fight too defensively. I think he started off slow and didn't really do a whole lot. But as the fight came to an end, he was going at Conor McGregor, which is something that he's not known to do. And so I think that overall the fight was better than I could have even imagined. And I agree, both guys won that fight.
Right.
Conor McGregor, who is, keep in mind, a lot of people don't realize he is 0-0 in boxing.
Right.
Going up against the greatest fighter probably of our time. And it's just insane that he went 10 and a half rounds. Was that right?
Yeah, he got stopped in the 10th.
Yeah, that's insane.
Well, I mean, if you think about it overall, it's because some people immediately were trying to take the shine off Conor. Like, immediately, like, oh, Floyd could have done that sooner. This was never in any doubt. I even had a buddy of mine who really just doesn't know much about combat sports at all just say, this fight was never close. And I was like, you just can't say something like that when the Showtime person who was actually scoring the fight ringside had it 5-4 Mayweather going into the 10th. And a lot of people I'm following on Twitter, and I'm following a lot of different people that are in MMA and in boxing, and they had it very similar. Some people had 3 rounds for Conor and more rounds for Floyd. But I mean, at the end of the day, this was just such an anomaly of a fight in so many ways. But someone, I think in the 4th or 5th round, I can't remember who tweeted it, but they said, this fight is already worth $100, whereas the entire Pacquiao fight wasn't even worth 10.
Yeah.
It was like, I mean, no truer words have been spoken kind of about the last several years of Mayweather's career, because he was either fighting tomato cans or he was fighting guys where he just basically would never engage because he knew he could just outpoint them by barely hitting them more times within the span of the round. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect fight for Mayweather to go out on. It was a huge high profile. It was the money fight, which is what he kind of built himself around by the end of his career. But 2, he looked good. I mean, he got a TKO finish, so he gets to kind of ride off into the sunset with his perfect 5-0. And, it's just something that is a nice little bow on top of his whole career. So great for Mayweather. I don't like him as a human being.
Sure, yeah.
But as a fighter, I can appreciate him. And then Conor gets to just go toe-to-toe with him. And nobody expected Conor to win. Let's be honest.
No, not at all.
Anybody who legitimately thought Conor would win was either delusional or, put way too much faith into his left hand. That being said, I think that was his only chance to win, but I don't think that meant that he was going to win.
Yeah, I mean, in his post-fight, he was talking with one of the Fox Sports reporters, and it was in the locker room. They were talking a little bit about the shots that he did land, where he was kind of snapping Floyd's neck back and head back with some of the jabs. But in one of the earlier rounds, it was like the 2nd or 3rd round, maybe the 4th round, Conor connected with an uppercut. Like, it was a counter uppercut. And so Conor said that if he had thrown it just a millisecond sooner, because it glanced, he said his glove glanced barely off of Floyd Mayweather's chest and then connected with his chin. But he said if it was just a millisecond earlier, it would have been square on the chin, full power, and that, the lights were going to go out. And so, of course, we'll never know if that was actually the case, if that would have actually happened. But the fact that he lands that shot was a miracle, because you have morons like Max Kellerman going out there who's just a boxing purist and he's just swinging from the ding-a-ling of boxing. But at the end of the day, he was just like, Conor will not land a punch. And guys like Brendan Schaub and other people are just like, this is crazy. Like, yes, he will land a punch. We're not saying that he's going to win, but this idea, and I even had people that are like, Floyd's going to knock him out in the first or second round. It's not even going to be close. It's like, guys, like that goes against everything Floyd has been about. Like a guy who's got completely brittle hands just coming out, throwing haymakers in the first and second round against one of the best counter strikers in all of combat sports. Like, come on, it just didn't make any sense. Like, it's okay to say that Conor did a really, really good job considering the circumstances and the magnitude. And this is just the latest instance of Conor showing up in the biggest moment and not letting it overtake him. You know, didn't win the fight, but he did amazing considering.
Totally. Do you think, talking about the punching power of Mayweather, do you think that the fight was called fairly? Do you think that they should have stopped it when they did?
No, I mean, and this is the interesting thing is, I know you're an MMA guy and I'm an MMA guy. The MMA community pretty much across the board says, no, fight was stopped too soon, which is interesting because in MMA, fights are stopped all the time before a guy's actually unconscious. Not normally when he's still standing, but a guy will still be conscious, you know, a little bit lucid, and then they'll stop the fight and step in. In boxing, that's why guys have died in the ring in boxing, is because they'll be unconscious, but the ropes are holding them up, or they go unconscious and then they get 10 seconds to be reconscious. Like, it's just this crazy scenario. So the MMA community, which, you know, is okay with these early stoppages, said no, like you either take him out or you don't take him out. Like, he had not knocked him down. And I mean, I don't know if you can remember one, but I can't think of an instance in a high profile boxing match where a guy had not been knocked down, he had not been warned for anything, didn't have a bad cut, and the fight was just stopped because he was tired. Now, to be fair, in boxing, a lot of guys don't get as tired as Conor did in this fight. You don't see guys just dying in the 10th or 11th round of a 12-round fight because that's what they've conditioned their whole lives to do. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it was stopped fairly. But to that end, to be fair, I don't think by any stretch of the imagination it changes the outcome. I still think that Floyd wins by TKO or maybe even KO. But yeah, you can't just come in there and, you know, but then like half the boxing community is like, no, it's good. But then, you know, the other half is like, you know, they probably shouldn't have stood in there. And people were pretending like they cared about Conor McGregor's well-being at that point. It's like, and then you had, you know, morons, even Joe Rogan called him out for this. The New York Times tweeted a headline saying that Conor's face had been completely bloodied and the ref basically came in there to stop him. Was like, at the end of the fight, Conor had a little birdie under his left eye, and that was it. So, I mean, I don't know. Did you kind of see it the same way in terms of hopping in there? Like, not going to change the outcome, but...
Yeah, I agree. I think two things. One, that Conor was going to lose the decision regardless. I mean, that's just how boxing is. It's no secret that the judges in boxing are less than perfect when it comes to their scoring. So
you're being nice. You can use the word corrupt. Like, it's okay to use that word.
All right, so boxing is corrupt.
Yeah, super corrupt.
So I knew that if it went to the judges, that there was no way that they were going to give it to Conor. And that's proven by the judges' scorecards, how they ended up being. We had Showtime saying that it was, what was it, 40? I mean, it was...
They had a 5 rounds to 4 Mayweather going into the final, the 10th round, the deciding round.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was... say Conor does win that. He doesn't win that match, or that round, obviously, because he was getting tired. But say he could have won that. I mean, it could have been tied going into the last 2 rounds. I mean, that's huge. But I think that overall, he was going to lose the decision regardless.
Right.
But two, when he was getting roughed up on the ropes, I think that he was tired. You could tell because he couldn't lift his arms up at certain points when he needed to. He needed to cover up, and he had his hands down by his waist. That is the number one sign of not just being tired, but I would say fatigue. Like you've done all that you can. He's also got twice the weight on his hands that he's not trained for. So in the UFC, it's 4-ounce gloves. Is that right?
Yep, 4 ounce.
And he was fighting in 8-ounce gloves. So that doesn't sound like a lot to me and you, but for somebody who's trained their entire lives in 4-ounce gloves, holding 8-ounce gloves on your hands at that level of performance, I mean, that all that stuff matters. All that stuff changes. That's why you get into like horsehair gloves and like all those little weird things, or like what the canvas type is, because you're fighting at such a high level. All those things are going to make a difference. So he was very fatigued. He was starting to just get roughed up. But that being said, I mean, this is the money fight. Like, this is the big fight. This is the big one. If you're ever going to let Conor hit the canvas, put it in this one.
Right.
You know, I'm not saying that everybody should just get destroyed till they're dead on the floor, but this is a high profile championship fight. Don't put any doubt in anybody's mind. I think it just looks bad on the sport. I think it looks like they were, you know, kind of coddling Mayweather a little bit.
Right.
Even though
as soon as it was in doubt, hop in there and stop it type of thing.
Yeah. So I think that give Mayweather that opportunity to seal the deal, done, no questions asked. Don't try to either protect him or, you know, give him that little push. Just let the fight happen as it was going to. At least give him a 10 count, 1-10 count, and then after that, fine, call it.
Yeah. I mean, and if he had been knocked down in the previous round or something like that, yeah, I'm okay with that stoppage. But I mean, look at the Chiesa Lee fight that happened in Oklahoma City. I mean, the thing about it now, it didn't end up hurting Lee because, you know, he's going to get an interim title shot, so it ended up working out okay for him. But you had the main event of a UFC it took the shine off of Lee, which Lee deserved to have that win, that signature win under his belt, even with the bad blood, and a bad ref's decision took that away. I'm not saying that was as egregious as maybe what we saw on Saturday. I don't know that they're necessarily comparable, but I mean, you have to leave no doubt. It's exactly what you're saying. And so at that point, I don't know that anyone in their right mind would say that all of a sudden Conor was going to have some miraculous gas tank. But to his credit, let's say he does make it out of the 10th round. And I'm not saying that this was going to happen. Now, he did say this after the fight, and I saw it with my own eyes the second time he fought Nate. But in the third round of the Nate Diaz fight, the second one, he looked completely done. Conor looked completely done. And I remember whenever it shifted in the second round to where you're just like, oh man, here we go. And then he comes back and he wins some of the later rounds. Like when he was completely done, he did get his second win in a 5-minute round where, you know, takedowns and kicks were things that he had to at least think about. So it's not crazy completely to think about that way, but by the 9th round, that was when, you know, Conor had been in there longer than he had ever been inside of a squared circle or a ring for any type of combat sport. So kind of tough to think that was going to happen, but yeah, I don't think it changes the outcome, but it was a little early.
Totally. And you know, to piggyback on that, who's to say, and this is crazy because Mayweather is so conditioned for this, but we don't know what if Mayweather would have punched himself out and then he would have had to sit back and, you know, take a break. And then now, you know, we don't know. We won't know because they called it. And we wouldn't be having this conversation had they just let it go to the canvas. So, I mean, we can say Conor stood in front of Mayweather for 10.5 rounds and never got dropped. Like, that's a big deal. Like, that's a huge deal. He never got dropped. Even though he technically lost, he got TKO'd, he never got dropped. And that's something to be said about Conor McGregor.
Well, and think about how happy Dana White, WME, ING, ABC, XYZ, LMNOP, whatever the name of that company is at this point. But like, not only did Conor go out there and pretty much make this fight happen with a lot of help, but he made this fight happen for himself for the most part. Not only does he do well in the setting, not only does he perform well in the actual combat, he didn't get embarrassed, and UFC is going to get their superstar back. Because there's not a whole lot of people clamoring for Conor to stay in boxing. Like, oh, who's next? It's not some sort of Goldberg moment. Like, they're just kind of worried about, like, what is Conor going to be doing at this point when he comes back to the UFC? That's the narrative. It's not, oh my gosh, Conor got beat up so bad. Is he done fighting? Because he's talked about retiring early, worried about brain damage and different things like that. But I want to go back to a point you had talked about earlier, because it's something that I don't think a whole lot of people talked about after the fight, but the absurd judges' scorecards that we saw. I mean, when I was following it on Twitter, I felt like most people were being fair, even in the MMA community. Most people had it 4 rounds to nothing to start the fight, and then the tide turned in the 5th round, and they're like, okay, Mayweather's just boom, 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 won the next 5. Chael Sonnen was the only one I saw that kind of had a little, he said it was 7-1, going into the 9th round. And so
like McGregor.
McGregor. So, I don't really know why he did that. He's got some interviews this week, so I'll be interested to hear what he says about that. But when they finally showed the judges' scorecards at the time that the TKO occurred, 2 of the judges had it 8-1 Mayweather.
It's insane.
8-1 Mayweather. And one judge had it a little bit better. He had it the same way Dominic Cruz had it, which was 6-3 Mayweather, which I disagree with, but I could see one of those rounds, probably the 3rd round, being flipped to Mayweather. But 8-1.
No way.
I mean, And this is always the thing with boxing, right? You mentioned them being corrupt earlier. We established that, but it's just like with the amount of money that was bet on Conor to win this fight, if Conor won, it was going to be the worst bath in the history of Las Vegas. They were going to lose so much of the betting money. And even with the $1 million bets at the end for Mayweather, that kind of, even the lines out a little bit, it was going to be one of the worst losses that they've taken just because of the sheer magnitude. But I mean, what did you think? Did you agree with the judges' scorecards or anything like that? I just felt like they were crazy.
Not at all. I thought that was insane. I mean, it's crazy, I think, because one, Mayweather sat back in the first at least 4 rounds, I think. Definitely the first 3. The 4th round is where things started changing, and definitely from the 5th round out, he was, starting to take control. But I mean, it's crazy to say that he won those rounds with his basically, with his hands just covering up. Like he wasn't throwing. McGregor was definitely the aggressor. So yeah, I don't see how he won. Definitely not 8. I could see the argument for sure. What'd you say, 6-3?
Yeah. Dominic Cruz had it 6-3, and then the third judge had it 6-3.
I'm fine with that one because the 4th round was close.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's the beat the champ. You got to beat the champ, you got to beat the champ or whatever it is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I get that. He had a little bit of bias there, but no way did Conor lose those first 3. I just don't see it anyway.
Well, in those first 3 rounds, just to kind of go back even to Conor's performance, like he looked so incredibly fast. Because all we've ever seen from Mayweather and we've ever heard about was how fast he was and how defensive he was. But then everything with Conor is like, these are his angles. He's got weird angles. Like he doesn't have boxing angles. Like he doesn't do the things that are normal. But even whenever he would switch his stance up real fast, he would switch to from southpaw to go into a right-handed stance. And they were so fast, but he didn't just switch to give it a look. He would switch and throw from that. And the one thing I really liked that he was doing is he left his lead hand, his right hand out there really often, kind of checking Mayweather's jab. I mean, that's something you saw him do against Eddie Alvarez. Like Eddie Alvarez was like, couldn't really get anything off, but like McGregor was kind of little brothering him a little bit, almost like what John Jones kind of did to Glover Teixeira, just like basically palming him, keeping him at distance and using, one of his natural given abilities on that. But, I just looking at this from the beginning, it's just like that did no favors for boxing to have those guys do it, because the Showtime guys who have a vested interest in a contract with Mayweather to make sure Mayweather looks good. I mean, I don't think this Paulie Malignaggi stuff that happened with him being a Showtime commentator and then going over and training with Conor and then ending up in the dressing room with Floyd and pretending like he told him the game plan, like all that stuff. Like you don't do all that unless you have a vested interest in them doing it. And the ringside person that was looking at the scorecards had it the same way I did, 4-5 going into the 10th round. Like, how is that a stretch of the imagination? I just don't understand.
Yeah. And I think that I think what you were talking about with, how Mayweather, this fight almost could be a knock on boxing a little bit is you bring in McGregor here. And one thing that I heard with the group that I was watching it with, and they weren't a lot of fight fans there. It was just kind of a bunch of casual people watching it with me. But they were saying, oh, what the heck is Conor doing? He doesn't even know how to box. He's, what he looks terrible in there. He doesn't look like he belongs in there. But to me, that was his key to victory. You're never going to beat Floyd Mayweather on a technical boxing by the book fight.
Right.
There's no way. And so what Conor had to do was show up and bring something new. He had to show up and fight from those weird angles, those switches. And he did look awkward. He looked a little awkward in there compared to a boxer, but Conor's not a boxer.
Right.
That's the whole shtick here. So I think that he fought the fight that he needed to fight, and I think Mayweather fought the fight that he needed to fight. I think they honestly both went out there with really good game plans, and I think that Conor had to do who was it? I think it was what's his name? Sugar Ray Leonard. Is he still alive?
Yeah.
So I think I was watching a deal, and it was an interview with him, and I think he was saying, you don't need to go in there and try to box Mayweather. You need to go in there and try to fight Mayweather.
Right.
And that's what Conor tried to do, is he tried to make it a fight. It wasn't a boxing match, it was a fight. And that's where he kind of, stayed back and, from long range and threw those real long punches that, Mayweather saw him coming. But, I mean, what else is he supposed to do? He's trying to figure out a puzzle that people 49 times over have not solved.
49 professional boxers who have only boxed their entire life.
Best in the world haven't solved. So he had to bring something new to the table, and that was his one chance at winning. So anybody that said that, he looked terrible or he looked weird or awkward in the fight, that was Conor's one chance.
Well, they said the same thing leading up to the fight. Watching his warm-ups and his crazy arm wingy flail things that he does, which whatever. It's kind of like a warm-up billionaire walk. But then at the same time, they were making fun of him even how he worked the heavy bag and the uppercut bag. And I'm sitting there the whole time like, do you guys honestly think that that's actually how he's going to throw his punches with that much, slowness and deliberateness? And it's just the thing that was apparent to me in this fight, Logan, was that the boxing crowd from, if they could come down low enough off of their high horses, they didn't know jack crap about Conor McGregor. They didn't know jack about him. They hadn't seen any of his fights. They had seen the name, they'd seen the highlights, but they had no idea what type of a fighter this was. Whereas most people in the MMA community have watched Floyd Mayweather and watched him for a long time, and they've at the very least watched his really big high profile fights against, De La Hoya or Pacquiao or those types of things. So they were aware, and so they were just so dismissive of this random Irish MMA guy that they missed out on something really integral and really key, is that this guy is a fighter and his number one tool in his fighter's belt is boxing. And so that's the thing here is most people, I've only really ran into one person who was really ridiculous about this, is in a real fight on the street, Conor McGregor kills Floyd Mayweather. Like in a MMA fight, Conor kills Floyd Mayweather well inside of one round. Like it's not even close. But in boxing, you can do 4 things: a cross, a jab, an uppercut, and a hook. That's it. Yeah. And you can really look at it. You can throw a punch to the head or the body with your right, or a punch to the head or the body with your left. There are so few things you can do in boxing, and you can set your feet in a way to where you're going to be so close and in tight with somebody. You're not looking at a takedown. You're not looking at a kick or any of those types of things. You're not having to worry about a front kick to the body or anything like that. And so it was disappointing to see that from the boxing community. And then immediately they tried to just pour shade on it and just be like, oh, it was a 40-year-old Mayweather and he had 2 years off and he still got the TKO. It's like, actually the narrative is way different. Is your number one everything guy lost multiple rounds to a guy that doesn't do this sport. So the thing I kept telling people beforehand is, because people didn't really understand how much different MMA and boxing were, but people know the NFL and the NBA, right? They know football and they know basketball. I said that would be as if Cam Newton, quarterback of the Panthers, great athlete, absolutely superior body in all kinds of ways, just super stud athlete. It would be like him going over and playing LeBron James in one-on-one basketball and losing a game to 21, losing like 21-18. Yeah. That would be, Cam Newton's a great athlete, but he's not a basketball player. Just because both sports have running and jumping and throwing and catching and all those different things, it doesn't make them the same. But just seeing where people's mindsets went, it just kind of showed that divide within boxing. But I'm with you that I think this is still an indictment on boxing, that a guy who does not do this and hasn't done it since he was an amateur boxer back in Ireland went in there and just showed up and showed out better than Pacquiao did, and it was at least comparable to how Canelo did.
Almost. I mean, let's look at the numbers on that. What was it, 88 from Pacquiao? It
was 81 from Pacquiao. 81 strikes landed, or punches landed. They don't do strikes there. But yeah, 81 punches landed in 12 rounds, and Conor had 111.
And Canelo only had 117, is that right?
Yeah, 117.
6 more punches. And how did that Canelo fight go all the way?
That went the full distance.
So yeah, he would have outstruck Canelo.
Right. By that time, even as tired as he was, in the first couple of rounds, or first couple of, flurries of each of the rounds, even when he was tired, he was still landing a few shots. And so, some people are like, oh, I didn't know we were handing out participation trophies. But I'm like, that's not what this is about. This is about comparing these two guys and comparing their performances. Like Pacquiao, who was Mr. Everything Southpaw, went in there and did a poor job against this exact same fighter. And you can talk about the game plan and you can sit there and wax poetic about, oh, well, if Floyd wanted to do that in the first round, he could have. I would have loved to have seen him try, because he was getting popped with McGregor's shots and his counter strikes in the first and second round. Every time he did engage, he ate a jab or he ate an uppercut. Like, sure, that would have been great. Go ahead and try to knock his head off. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, because Floyd has talked about his hands and he didn't spar at all coming into this fight because of how brittle his hands are. And you're telling me that he's going to go punch Conor in his gigantic Irish forehead in the first round and break his hand and not have the use of one of his hands for the rest of the fight? Get the heck out of here.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, do you think and I think I know the answer to this, but do you think that if Mayweather came over to the UFC, like top 15 would wipe the floor with him? I mean, we're talking we send, one of our best strikers in MMA over to boxing and he gets outboxed. But does Mayweather even break top 15 in MMA? Because people are almost discrediting that, saying like, oh yeah, well, see, our guy beat your guy, so, he's amazing. And, everybody there's kind of this agreement that MMA is going to, that Mayweather is going to, beat Conor hands down. Does Mayweather come into MMA and beat anybody?
Well, as you were saying that, I'm looking up we'll go ahead and look up 155 because we would assume that would be where Floyd would go. And so I'm just going to run through the top 5 here to even say if Mayweather would even have a chance. So you got Conor McGregor, you have Tony Ferguson, Khabib, you have Edson Barbosa, and then you have Eddie Alvarez. That's your top 5. And I'm not even going to try to say Khabib's last name. So something super Russian and soaked in vodka. Okay, top 5. Floyd, do they have any chance there?
I mean, the only person I could even think it being close would be Alvarez, but Alvarez kills him on the ground no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, do you think Alvarez is going to stand in box?
No way.
Okay, let's go to the next 5. So you have Justin Gaethje, you have Kevin Lee, who's about to fight Tony Ferguson for the interim title. You have Michael Johnson, you have Michael Chiesa, and then you have Dustin Poirier.
I mean,
those are all killers.
Yeah, I mean, they all have ground games. I mean, to be top 15, to be top 10 or 15, you have to have a killer ground game at this point in the sport. So with Mayweather having no ground game, you just take him down and it's done. I mean, and it's, people say, well, it's not that simple. I mean, it is that simple. Look at James Toney.
Right. Oh my gosh. What a joke that was.
And that wasn't even a huge takedown. That wasn't a, crazy double leg that ran across the ring, or he didn't pick him up over his head. He just reached down and ankle picked him.
Right.
Which is like the most low level form of takedown I can even imagine.
And Tony didn't even get James Toney didn't even get his hips off the mat after that. And so, I mean, even I was just kind of looking over the rankings. Anthony Showtime Pettis is ranked 17th at 155 pounds in the UFC. Former champion.
Yeah.
Is ranked 17th. You have Jim Miller is 20th. Jim Miller has 28 MMA wins and only 10 losses. He's ranked 20th. I mean, that's the thing is I will admit when Ronda Rousey was destroying the entire planet, I was one of the guys that was like, man, I honestly think she could beat Floyd Mayweather in a fight just because of the takedowns and the judo. And then we just saw like any type of striking of any sort, like from Holm or Nunes it was going to spell the doom of Ronda Rousey. But like it's such a ridiculous thing to say that a boxer could come in. And there's been some boxers that have come out and said, oh, I'll try it. It's like, yeah, but you're not signing. You're not putting pen to paper. You're not going to do anything like that. And so, yeah, I mean, from a very, very small sample size, MMA translates way better to boxing than boxing does to MMA.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you just have so much more that you have to know, and that's why MMA is so much easier to go over to boxing and to be beaten, because they're spending their whole lives learning 30 different martial arts as opposed to one.
Right.
And it's great. I'm never going to take away from the top boxers. I mean, they are extremely skilled at what they do, but their skills are very limited when it comes to what MMA provides.
Right. Well, and Kevin Lee was just on an interview recently on a podcast, and he was asked about his skill set because he was a college wrestler. He went to the same school as Tony Ferguson did. So there's an interesting thing that, Tony Ferguson got out about a year before Kevin Lee came in or something like that. And they used to wrestle a little bit in the wrestling room, but Kevin Lee learned to wrestle and competed in wrestling because he knew he was going to eventually be in MMA. This wasn't like a guy who was a collegiate wrestler that was pretty good, maybe an All-American, and then he's just like, well, let's just see if this fighting thing's going to work out. And the thing with Kevin Lee, the quote that he said that I think is applicable here is he was talking a lot about it was like if you were a good wrestler and you had a little bit of stand-up, you could have a decent career in the UFC. But now if it's like, hey, you're a wrestler with decent stand-up, it's like, is that it? Like, is that all you have? Are those the only 2 skills? Like, you don't have any Muay Thai? You don't have any kickboxing? You don't have any jiu-jitsu? Like, even judo, or like kind of start going out to these other things. It's like, you have none of those things. Like how many super one-dimensional fighters, heavyweights gets a little bit different, but in some of the lower weight classes, 205 and down, we'll say that. How many one-dimensional fighters are there?
I can't think of any.
Like that are studs, right? Yeah. That are champions. It's just kind of like you're good at everything.
Yeah. And if anybody is actually one-dimensional in there, they've got some kind of answer to break their downfall. So a good example, let's say somebody's not a good wrestler. Okay, well, then maybe they have amazing takedown defense. And so like, even if you are one-dimensional, you still have to pay attention to everything else. 10, 15 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Right.
Everybody talks about the Bonner-Griffin fight, which is one of the greatest fights of all time, but it is one of the sloppiest.
Yeah, just technically terrible fights ever. But It was just the most important fight in UFC history because that's
and it was highly entertaining. Yeah, it's one of my favorite fights to watch. Even after all this time, but it was just sloppy. It was, and you come into the UFC with that kind of skill set now, and you're not getting anywhere. You're not going to be a champion. But Griffin made it there. He did get to be champion at one point. So
well, to your point about Griffin, think about his title fight when he took the title from Rampage. At that point, I forget how long ago that was, maybe 8 or 9 years ago now. Rampage was a one-dimensional fighter, but his dimension that he was good at involved him murdering people inside of the octagon and having them be carried out unconscious, right? But then Griffin did his whole game plan based on leg kicks and defensive striking, and he won the UFC title. And you can do all the arguments you want about, he shouldn't have been in there to begin with, and, paper champion or any of these things. He didn't defend it for a long time. And, did you see what Anderson did to him? You can make all those arguments. He's one of a small handful of modern 205-pound champions in the UFC. And he took out a killer.
And that was when the division was stacked.
Right.
Because at that time, I'm not going to go through everybody, but they had Shogun. They had Rampage. I think Vanderlei was on the scene.
Vanderlei, I think, was on the scene. Chuck Liddell was still active.
Rich Franklin, Anderson Silva, right?
Well, Silva was at 85, and so, but he did fight for us at 205.
Up to 205, yeah.
Right. And at that point, I think Silva may had already done his debut fight at 205.
James Irvin.
Yeah. may he rest in peace. His Wikipedia page still says he's owned by Anderson Silva, I'm pretty sure. But that's the thing, is the overall point that we're making is that it's absurd to think that all combat sports are equal for one and that they're so translatable. I think Chael Sonnen, I listen to his podcast all the time, and he was talking about how there's a reason why like karate gyms and Aikido gyms and basically any gym taught by a guy in a black robe by the airport, like those types of fighting, like those are not in those types of fighters and those types of gyms have not really embraced MMA in the way that these other things have, like boxing or like jiu-jitsu or wrestling or those types of things. And the reason is because in the early days of the UFC, you had this guy, this beer belly and a black belt, and he's teaching all these kids that, you can use energy and, you can use all these different karate stances to beat your opponent. And then these guys went in against fighters and they got murked. Outside of Machida, like there's not really a guy that's like a strictly karate guy that has done super well at the highest of levels. You have Sage Northcutt, which he hasn't really had a very good UFC career. He'd be cut by now if he didn't look like a supermodel. But at the end of the day, like that's the thing about these sports is we're getting down to the nuts and bolts of what are the best types of combat sports. And the other thing about it is if you take it to the street and you're a boxer and you don't knock the guy out and he gets his hands on you, it's a problem if he's a grappler or a wrestler because it's really, really hard to box off your back. It's really, really hard to box when someone has knee on belly. Like those just aren't things that you can do. And when you see most street fights, they devolve. It's not a whole lot of this, jab in, set the tone early, like I'm going to see if he gasses out. So I think MMA is clearly the most translatable and the types of things that build into a core MMA fighter, the boxing, the wrestling, and the jiu-jitsu especially, it's far superior than boxing alone.
100% agree. And that's why me and you both train MMA and not boxing.
Right. Yeah. And boxing's important. It's an important skill to have, but it's like if you're building a house and you have a hammer and no other tools, it's going to be a really crappy house. Like, it's just think about it. You got to have more tools in your tool belt. And, boxing just has to be one of them, not the only one.
Yeah, totally. And MMA is as close as you can get to fighting legally, like an actual fight.
Sanctioned legal street fight.
Yeah. I mean, so it's as close as you can get. So, I mean, there's just no comparison.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Cool. What's next?
Yeah, well, I think right now, I mean, it's kind of, I think we've really gone through a lot of the fight and looked at it. But I mean, immediately within any types of fights, it's like, okay, so what's next? So
That's what I meant. I totally meant that when I said what's next.
No, I knew that. I mean, you just went full Goldberg. You ripped half your shirt off. It's really great. I wish this was a video podcast just for that purpose. But the thing about it is okay, so what's next for Floyd? What's next for Conor?
Okay.
So what do you think?
Floyd's done. He's proved everything.
Really?
I think so. Unless he runs out of money again. I mean, that's very possible.
And again, it wouldn't be the first time a fighter went out on top-ish. I mean, no one's really gone out on as much of a top as Floyd Mayweather has, just money-wise. But, man, let's say it's 2 years from now and Entourage is getting smaller. No one's really saying his name. I mean, the dude's a petty narcissist if I've ever seen one.
Very true.
And so, I don't know. I would like to say 100% that I agree with him being done, but it's just like 50-0. You broke Marciano's record, which no one's really talking about. Like, I mean, do you really want to risk 50-1? Like some tear the universe in half punch by some no-name tomato can, or a rematch with Pacquiao, or, the winner of Triple G Canelo? Like, ugh, yeah, I just don't.
And he's not going to get any better. I mean, he's at a point in his life where at that age, it doesn't matter how good you are, unless you're Randy Couture. And even then, that was when TRT was legal and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, I don't see how that. I mean, he's just going to decline from here. Yeah. We are seeing the best Mayweather that we are going to see from this point on. So, does he chance it in 2 years, 5 years, whatever, to make his comeback? Even Ali had that issue.
Yeah, that's the thing no one really talks about with Ali is the end of his career was nothing if not sad, and may have led to, the state of affairs that he had with his health for so long, because, I mean, he was just taking beatings, and his fighting style was kind of like that. He was going to let you throw and throw and throw and, hit on him until the later rounds, and he was just going to pick you to pieces. But man, I mean, as much as I think Floyd Mayweather is a colossal douchebag, and technically his record is 51-0 if you count the time he beat his wife. He definitely won that fight as well.
The women's league.
Yeah, he won the women's league and then 50 against the men's division. So, but at that space, but I would never wish ill will on him. I don't want the guy to have brain damage. I'd prefer him not to have a strip club called the Girl Collection. Doesn't exactly go in the argument that you're not a misogynist and that you, maybe don't value women properly. It's not exactly helping him. But yeah, I don't want to see him come back. And here's the other thing is, who would he come back against that any of us would watch? He's not going to come back against, another MMA fighter. No one's going to have that type of meteoric rise. He's not going to fight Cody Garbrandt or he's not going to fight any of these guys. He's not going to fight Tony Ferguson or Kevin Lee. So it's it would be a legit boxing guy. And then we'd be right back to where we have been for the last 10 years with him, which is, here, let me give you $60 of my money and let you rape me for the next 12 rounds because it's just going to be super boring.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah. So I think if he doesn't, I think he should retire. But if he doesn't, I don't know. I mean, even then, nobody has Pacquiao, I think, was the big one. Everybody knew who Pacquiao was.
Right.
So who does everybody know now?
Canelo and Triple G, and that's it.
And see, even then with Triple G, I don't think casual people know him.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, I mean, we know him just because we're around the sport, even though we don't follow boxing all that closely. But having just... I don't see that being a big money fight. I think it might. The way they'd sell that fight would be, oh, this is Mayweather's triumphant return. We all thought he was going to retire, but he's really not. But it's not going to be this is the money fight between so and so and so and so. That would The focus would all be on Mayweather. So I think really this was the last chance that he had to really step up and say this is a colossal fight.
Right, and Mayweather made his career on avoiding dangerous fighters when they were the most dangerous. He fought Oscar De La Hoya and Sugar Shane Mosley after their primes, as he was coming up and in his prime. He fought Canelo before his prime, and Pacquiao. And then it came out afterwards that Pacquiao's left shoulder was pretty much completely worthless in that fight. So much so that they were thinking about having some sort of class action lawsuit because of the amount of money that was bet on him, and he didn't disclose the injury, and all he got a cortisone shot in, and all these different things. So his number one weapon he couldn't have, which was his left, which was his hard left. And that was a fight that should have happened about 7 years before it actually went down. So I just don't see a scenario where Floyd, at the age of 41 or 42 or older, comes back to fight a Canelo or a Triple G that is in their prime, like in the middle of their prime. And then here's the other things. I mean, we're not going to talk about that on this podcast, but I think Canelo takes care of Triple G, but Triple G has legitimate one punch, screw your life power, like where he's just going to knock you unconscious. Whereas Canelo's more of a tactician. So, but from your perspective, to flip on to Conor, when you think about what's next for Conor, there's been a lot of different people that have thrown out different ideas and points of view and opinions, but like, what do you think would be next for Conor?
See, that to me is a much more exciting question than what happens with Mayweather. Because I mean, we all think Mayweather should be done, but McGregor is in his prime. You know?
28.
He is hot right now, and he's going to be good for 5 years. You know, even if he's in some wars, he might not be at the top still, but he's going to be a beast inside the ring for at least 3 years. He could be best in the world for 3 years easy right now.
Yeah, that's fair.
So, who does he fight? I have no idea. I think that
Well, do you think it'll be MMA or boxing? Let's start there, because there are people saying that he's going to go and fight Paulie Malignaggi, bring him out of retirement in boxing. Do you feel like
I think he wants to do MMA. I think that afterwards he was kind of on a high and was just kind of like, yeah, this was fun. But I think that his heart's in MMA.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't throw that many kicks as flashy as he does and just say, nah, I don't need to do that.
Right.
You know, I think that he did the boxing thing for the legend to reach legendary status,
which he did,
and for the money.
Right.
But I think that his heart and his passion is about fighting. And so I think it'll definitely be MMA, unless they just throw $100 million at him.
Which, I mean, he's not going to get that to fight Malignaggi. And then the other thing, kind of what we were saying with Canelo and Triple G, I don't think there would be a huge clamoring for the winner of that fight to fight the loser of the Mayweather-McGregor money fight. I just don't really see that. So I agree with you. I don't think it'll be in boxing either. I mean, the names that have surfaced already were the trilogy with Nate Diaz. So, you know, Nate was at the fight, took pictures with Floyd Mayweather afterwards. Conor's first response in his post-fight press conference kind of alluded to the fact that Nate might be next. There's talk about Max Holloway, which I don't know. We'll talk about that one. But even like the thing you would think is he would go back to the 55-pound division and fight the winner of Tony Ferguson and Kevin Lee. But I mean, the crazy thing before we get into some of those options was Khabib is nowhere in this conversation. And here's why I think that's crazy, because the UFC is wanting to expand into Russia. And Russia is nothing if not a fighter's nation, right? Just tons and tons of fight fans. I mean, you've heard about the UFC brass going and talking to Vladimir Putin to try and get this worked out. It'll be a gigantic stadium wherever it is. It'll be a ton of drunk Russian people. Like, it'll be a huge, huge event. And there's really one high-profile Russian fighter, and that's Khabib. But the dude cannot stay healthy. And Khabib, I thought about this the other day. I was like, that is the greatest fighter that no one's ever seen fight.
Yeah.
Because I can think of when he fought Michael Johnson, and that's the only other one I can remember. Because the dude fights once a century, essentially. I don't get it.
He's the Derrick Rose of MMA.
Pretty much, yeah. He's like the most talented, could be the most dominant player ever, but he's constantly in the hospital or at Walgreens picking up some sort of prescription. Like, it's just like, what does this guy got to do? And now you have the weight issues. So he should probably be fighting at 70, but he'd be a midget at 70. It's kind of like what Dos Anjos is dealing with right now, trying to be in that little in-between where he's a midget at welterweight. But, I mean, before all this kind of went down, I was thinking, man, I bet the UFC is crossing their fingers that Khabib beats Tony Ferguson and then Conor goes and fights him. But then, the boxing thing happens. But it's just crazy to see that Khabib is not anywhere near this conversation, because that would be huge for the UFC money-wise.
Well, and I think he's proven that he can't be trusted. I mean, even though as good as he is, the biggest issue with Khabib is that he can't. Who's to say if he's going to show up or not?
Right. And you can't go around the world and do a tour and spend all that money on promotion. That's why Jose's not deep in any of these types of things. That's why he's not at the top of the bill.
And that's why John Jones is out. I mean, they gave him chance after chance. And Dana White even said he's never headlining an event again. And what happened when he let him headline an event?
Weird, he headlines. And then pops. Yeah, we'll talk about that one too.
Right. So I think Dana is probably looking at guys who show up. And who always shows up? Conor McGregor.
Yeah. He will fight anybody.
Anyone, anytime, 2 weeks notice, it doesn't matter. I mean, Nate Diaz, he fought on 2 weeks notice, right? Was it like a month?
It was like 11 days.
That's what
and it was 2 weight classes above. No. He was going to fight Rafael dos Anjos at 55 for his belt. And then that went out the window when he hurt his foot, apparently. And then, Nate stepped in at last minute, but said he couldn't make the weight, so they fought at 70.
Yeah. So he's always down. Chad Mendez, that was the fight that everybody thought he was going to lose.
Right?
That was
wrestler, the guy that Conor just can't beat.
And he didn't have time. He didn't have time to train because I think it was...
Was
it 2 weeks?
That was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah. So Conor is he's definitely earned his place in the UFC because he's stepping up, and I promise you that he's not fighting 100% every time.
Right.
I'm sure he's nursing injuries all the time. And there's this weird idea that you have to fight at 100% health, and you're never going to be 100%.
It's not realistic.
Yeah. I mean, especially with just the intensity of training. I mean, how many times do people get beat up in training and you hear, that the fight's off because they got a takedown on them and blew their knee out or something like that.
Right.
I mean, you're going to get hurt. And I'm not saying you should fight with a torn, ACL or something like that, but
yeah, Juliana Pena blew out every ligament in her knee during training. And then you have Cain Velasquez, and then you got DC that's gotten hurt in training. And Habib's at that gym as well. Was that AKA?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are they doing over there?
Like apparently murdering each other and hitting people with kendo sticks and all kinds of things, and like water torture and like waterboarding, whatever else that they're doing over there. Like none of them can stay healthy.
Yeah.
So probably comes down to a little bit of that. But to your point, I think the UFC is good to really look at a Tony Ferguson or a Nate Diaz, because those guys are definitely going to show up. And here's the thing, in my opinion, there's really only one fight that makes sense. And I think you're going to agree, is Nate Diaz. That is the only fight that makes sense, because here's the thing, and purists, weight class purists are going to be like, no, it's got to be the winner of Kevin Lee and Tony Ferguson, and I get that. I get that it's the belt. I get that it's got to be next guy up. But Tony Ferguson is the number one contender, and Kevin Lee's what, 6th or 7th in the rankings? So don't tell me that all of a sudden this is like a contender matchup, because Habib's always hurt. Eddie Alvarez is above Kevin Lee in the rankings, but he's already lost to Conor. This is about marketing. The most marketable fight possible in MMA right now is Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor trilogy. There's nothing even close. A Ronda comeback against Holly Holm is not there. Holly Holm and Cyborg is not there. I can't, like this ridiculous, let's say John Jones and Brock Lesnar, they do an all new like anabolic division to where it's just like, hey, come in looking like one gigantic pectoral muscle with like 2 fists hanging out. Like even if that happened, it wouldn't be near as much clamor as a Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor. Like, 100%. I mean, am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, that feels way bigger.
And that's what Nate's waiting for. Let's be honest.
Right.
The reason Nate hasn't been fighting is because he got that McGregor money, and he realizes that, hey, I don't have to fight for peanuts anymore.
Right, or penis, either one. Penis. Like, yeah, because he's fought for both, I think. You've got to really make sure you enunciate what he's fighting for. But I mean, you're right though, that it's just Nate wants that kind of money. And think about this: let's say Nate, since the last time he fought Conor, had stayed on a normal schedule and maybe fought 2 or 3 times since then. I would venture to say, wouldn't even make maybe a quarter of what he's going to make off of fighting McGregor once. And so he can just train when he wants, smoke weed, and go to the beach and like do whatever he wants in the meantime, and not get brain damage.
Yeah. Like,
and not have to beat his body up and take, a myriad of leg kicks, because that's just kind of what you do to Nate Diaz, chop him down. But
yeah, and he takes a lot of damage in his fights. I mean,
right.
the Diaz brothers are known for having their granite chins. You can't drop them, and if you do, they just get back up.
Right.
And I mean, he took the best of McGregor and just kept coming. And so, I mean, I think that the way they fight is high damage, so he's got to have high risk, high reward.
Right.
And you're not going to be able to get by with paying Nate Diaz 50K for a fight.
Yeah, 50 and 50 or even something like that just to show. Well, let's take that. So I think we're both thinking that, I would like to see him fight Tony Ferguson. That's fine. I'm not a big Kevin Lee fan, just I don't like his attitude, but that would be a good fight just because him and Conor would go back and forth. But let's go ahead and talk about, Conor and Nate. So Conor and Nate fight for the third time. So the first fight, about a week before the fight, Conor had some sort of crazy staph infection. He was in the hospital. No one ever talked about it. Joe Rogan released it on his podcast without really McGregor's knowledge or anything like that. So it affected his gas tank. Conor got hit with a huge shot in the second round, and he was tired, and that was pretty much all she wrote. And he was doing all this like wheel kicks and jumping around and all this crazy stuff in the first round and just blew his gas tank in the first fight.
He threw everything but the kitchen sink.
Right.
I mean, I remember that fight, and I was just like, he is going 100%.
Right. He was clowning because he didn't think it was going to be a fight. He didn't think it was going to take him any time to dispatch him.
Yeah.
And fast forward to the second fight, one of the greatest fights in UFC history, a back and forth battle where he knocks Nate down a whole bunch. Clearly won the first 2 rounds, and then people score the last 3 rounds very differently. I had it 3 rounds to 2 for Conor. Some people had it 3-2 for Nate, type of a deal. But it was methodical. McGregor didn't clown at all. He threw a ton of leg kicks, like almost broke his foot throwing leg kicks and just chopped him down. But then Nate did what Nate does, and he kind of comes out of his little cyborg stupor, and then he just kind of comes through and comes forward. I mean, in a third fight, what do you think happens? Let's say that's the fight that happens before the end of the year. What do you think about that fight?
I think Conor takes it again. Everybody knows Nate Diaz's game plan. Nobody talks about how smart Nate Diaz is. I
wonder why.
So, I mean, Nate Diaz would do his kind of come forward thing, do his small flurries and things like that, his high output combos and whatnot. He wouldn't check leg kicks. I mean, I think it would honestly go the exact same way the second fight did. I think that it would still be a close, entertaining fight for sure. I don't think that Nate would make any adjustments. And I think that Conor already kind of cracked that, and it's just stay persistent. And even if you're, getting beat up, and even if he starts to gain the advantage, just stay composed, get your feet back under you, and just start fighting back. And, Nate will back off a little bit, because where really the Diaz brothers excel is when you start to cover up and you start to kind of let them take control of the fight. So, I think that even if Nate tried to switch it up, Conor is smart enough in the ring to just change it up. Really the Diaz brothers, they win their fights by just being tougher than their other opponent. They don't ever win by being smarter, whereas Conor very clearly outsmarts all the opponents. So I think that, I don't know if he would get dropped just because he has been taking some time off, and so he's not just accumulating a bunch of CTE going into the fight, you know. So I don't think that he would still drop him. I think it would go the same way. I think Conor would probably actually be a little more reserved, because I think he now realizes that going 25 minutes, going 30 minutes that's the end of his tank. And some guys that's where their body's set. And nobody's going to say that Conor McGregor isn't putting in the effort. Right. Nobody's going to sit there and say, man, well, if Conor McGregor would just do some cardio. He would just
work hard, Yeah,
just put in a little bit more.
Well, here's the thing with Nate is who Nate is. There's not going to be some, like that was my biggest thing going into the John Jones fight with DC last, is we didn't see DC turned into some different fighter since he had last fought John Jones. He was the exact same guy. He wasn't any better, wasn't any worse. He was the exact same type of guy. Nate is who Nate is. He's not all of a sudden going to start throwing some crazy kicks. He's not all of a sudden going to be shooting blast doubles, taking guys down and getting their back or any of those things. That's just not the type of fighter that he is. There's kind of an old adage in boxing is if in the first fight, the younger fighter won, in the rematch, the younger fighter will win again, only faster. And so in my opinion, I agree with you. I think he wins, but this time I think he finishes him. And I think if they fight again, I think that Conor absolutely destroys him, because you got to think about the training that Conor has done for the last 8 months. It has pretty much been strictly boxing. And what did we talk about earlier? What is Conor's best tool?
Striking.
His boxing and his striking. And so, yes, people made a lot about how Nate doesn't have great boxing, not fast boxing. He was still hitting Conor. Oh, man, if you don't believe that Conor's boxing got better in the last several months, like, let me go ahead and rewind for you what happened on Saturday in the Mayweather fight. Like, it's one of those things that he was touching Nate up as easily as he wanted to that entire fight, especially in those first 2 rounds. And, Nate was kind of taking the shots and falling down, almost wanting Conor to follow him. But Conor's just going to be like, nah, just get right back up, because Conor's not going to follow him to the ground like he did with Eddie Alvarez and try to finish him down there, because his jiu-jitsu is way too dangerous. Even late in a round, I don't see him doing something like that. But I just seeing it be way, way worse, which is the best case scenario for the UFC, because people are going to watch just for Nate Diaz. People are going to watch just because of Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, even though he lost to Mayweather, his star is shining even brighter and shooting higher than it was pre-fight. Like, not anywhere near the legendary status if he had actually beaten Mayweather, knocked him out or something like that. But yeah, and then from there, it's, it's almost a letdown, because then it's just like Tony Ferguson's a monster and Kevin Lee is a burgeoning star, but it's just like, is there anyone else around to fight? And knowing Conor, who's to say he's not going to challenge who's ever at 70? Think about this. This just blew my mind. It's not even that crazy. He comes back, he fights Nate. In that same time period, GSP fights and beats Michael Bisping, or loses to Michael Bisping, one of the two. And then they just decide to do a money fight either way, no belt on the line at 170. Man. Conor McGregor, GSP at 170.
That's huge. I could see that. I could see it, because those are the fights that Conor McGregor wants. Conor McGregor does not want to fight some guy. Like, Conor McGregor won't want to fight Ferguson, if only to prove that he can fight a guy who's got a ground game.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you say, hey, Conor, you want to fight GSP or you want to fight Tony Ferguson, you know who he's going to pick.
I mean, and it would be GSP in Toronto or GSP in Dublin.
Yeah.
Like, it would be something like that. And so, I mean, you think about the stars aligning. I just don't see a scenario where GSP beats Michael Bisping and stays at 85. I think he beats Michael Bisping in their fight, but does he really want to go up there and stay with guys like Yoel Romero? And I mean, I just don't see that type of a setup for GSP. And then if he goes down to 70, this is late in his career as well. I mean, people are already saying if he comes back and loses to Michael Bisping, he might just call it quits, say, yeah, I made my comeback, but that's about it for me. He's already ancient in MMA years. But I mean, gosh, like, I don't think that would be a great fight for Conor by any stretch of the imagination, because of just the superior wrestling that GSP has on everybody he's ever gone in there against. But good grief, if the world would not stop just to watch what would happen in that fight.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that's exciting. I say that is more likely to happen. Diaz, I think, is the obvious answer. But I think that GSP, man, I think it's money fights. It's super fights. McGregor, he's looking to be a legend. And he's not going to get there by beating these. I mean, he's gone through the lower ranked guys, and now he needs to start fighting legends, and putting in those wars. And I mean, and Diaz already had a big following, so he was down to do that, because what else was he going to do? Not show up on fight week? That's not McGregor,
right?
So I think that Diaz was the perfect opponent to set up for that, and I think that coming back just for the trilogy, it's amazing. And GSP, everybody would tune in for that. Beyond that, I don't know, man. I don't know if he'd be interested. He's definitely not going to 145.
Yeah, that ship has sailed. So and that's kind of what we talked about earlier with Max Holloway, is people are like, oh, what if it's Max Holloway? Well, okay, Max just won the belt against Jose Aldo, looked fantastic, but he hasn't cleaned out the division. It's not like Max Holloway's been the 45-pound champion for the last 2 years and he's running out of guys he hasn't already beaten. At that point, it makes sense for him to come up. But in their last fight, Conor McGregor beat him fairly easily, and Conor McGregor blew out his knee in the middle of the fight. And so, I mean, just the optics of that. And Holloway's on an unbelievable tear right now. That was the last fight he lost, was against Conor McGregor. But yeah, right now it's a bit premature. Like, Max Holloway's got about 4 or 5 more big fights that he's got to win before you could even think about putting him in there with McGregor. And we talked about the top 10, 15, 20 guys that are in the 55-pound division. Like, there's a lot of potential killers in that division. And let's say Khabib gets his crap together and that ends up working out. Again, I don't know that Dana takes a risk like you were saying earlier, but yeah, there's a lot of options for Conor. So It's ripe for the pickings for him right now.
And at 145, Conor looked like a White Walker. Like,
he looked awful.
He looked dead.
And he looks great at 55. Mm-hmm. And he looked a little sloppy at 70, but yeah, at 55, that's where he boxed at. That's a really, really good weight for him, for a guy that probably walks around normal at about $170, $175. 55 is great for him.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. Anything else you want to go over?
No, I think that's a pretty good thing. We pretty much did all the scenarios possible. What happened in the ring, after. It's like we're professionals or something.
What kind of underwear do you think Conor McGregor wears?
Definitely wears Saks. They're like the greatest underwear. And this podcast is not brought to you by Saks or anything, or MeUndies, as Bill Burr would say, or something like that.
But hey, if they want to throw me some money, I'm not going to.
Yeah, if you want to, like, throw me some money or just some underwear. It's $30 a piece for these things. I'm currently wearing them right now. No joke. If it was a video podcast, I'd prove it. But you know, he did. But he did wear, what did he wear? Calvin Klein to the weigh-in was what Conor wore.
Yeah, sure.
And then a sock in his drawer, so that's what it looked like. So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of whatever he wants to do. I mean, regular Calvin Klein.
That's a different podcast going over the weigh-in.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to do underwear style of fighters or anything. Or we need to go back to that one fighter who fought in that like pink onesie thing where one of his nuts fell out in the middle of the fight. So yeah, you're right.
And he was going against the guy with the shaved arrow.
Yeah, it was like the biggest crap show. Like when people think about MMA and say it's cockfighting, that's the highlight video they've seen was from that fight. And that's the reason why it took so long to get sanctioned in New York. That one terrible fight.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Awesome. Well, hey, that wraps it up, I guess. Thanks for coming, man. It was very insightful.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. You're doing a great job with all this. And if you guys want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at KyleOKC, where I do talk about MMA from time to time. And I really appreciate you having me on here.
Thanks, man. Take it easy. Bye.
Please leave that in there. Bye.
Bye.